Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The blue light of 32 high-definition monitors washed over Julian's face, turning his pale, terrified expression into a ghostly mask as he realized every single screen was broadcasting a live feed of him. His breath hitched, trapped in a throat suddenly too tight to function, as his eyes darted frantically across the wall of surveillance. There he was, sleeping in the guest room down the hall. There he was 3 days ago, weeping over divorce papers in the kitchen. There he was, 5 years ago, laughing at a graduation party he hadn't even known Adrian attended. The sheer scale of the obsession was a physical weight, pressing him into the expensive carpet of the hidden server room. Before he could turn, before he could even process the violation, the heavy steel door behind him clicked shut with the finality of a coffin lid. "I explicitly told you," a deep, baritone voice purred from the shadows, smooth as velvet wrapped around a jagged blade, "that the East Wing was strictly off-limits, Julian." 3 weeks earlier, Julian Vane felt less like a man and more like a collection of shattered glass held together by a cheap suit and a staggering amount of denial. The rain in Seattle was relentless, hammering against the roof of his beat-up sedan as he stared up at the monolithic glass spire of the Obsidian Tower. It was a fortress of wealth and privacy, the kind of place that looked down on the rest of the city with indifferent disdain. It was also the home of Adrian Cross. Julian hadn't spoken to Adrian in 4 years. Not since college, where they had been roommates. An odd pair consisting of Julian, the scholarship art student with ink-stained fingers and a perpetual smile, and Adrian, the scion of an import-export empire who wore silence like armor. They had drifted apart when Julian met Elias. Elias, with his charming smile and his promises. Elias, who had spent the last year draining Julian's bank account to fund a gambling addiction and a mistress, before serving Julian divorce papers on their anniversary. Homeless, penniless, and stripped of his dignity, Julian had scrolled through his contacts until his thumb hovered over the only name that felt like a lifeline. Adrian. He had expected a rejection. Instead, Adrian had answered on the first ring, his voice devoid of surprise, as if he had been waiting by the phone for 4 years. "Come home, Julian." Now, standing in the private elevator that ascended rapidly to the penthouse, Julian tried to smooth the wrinkles in his drenched coat. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing an expanse of black marble, floor-to-ceiling windows, and modern art that cost more than Julian's entire life earnings. And there was Adrian. He hadn't aged, he had simply sharpened. He was taller than Julian remembered, his shoulders broader beneath a charcoal button-down that was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the hollow of a throat that looked sculpted from alabaster. His hair was black as a raven's wing, swept back from a face that was devastatingly handsome and utterly unreadable, except for the eyes. They were gray, the color of a stormy sea, and they locked onto Julian with a terrifying intensity. "You're soaking wet," Adrian said, not as a greeting, but as an observation of fact. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, disregarding Julian's flinch. I didn't have an umbrella," Julian stammered, clutching his meager duffel bag tighter. "Adrian, I can't thank you enough. I just need a place for a few weeks until I get my salary advance, and then—" "Hush!" Adrian reached out, his hand hovering for a second before he gripped Julian's shoulder. His touch was scorching, searing through the damp fabric. "You will stay as long as you need. Forever if you like. This is your home now." Julian looked up, startled by the gravity in Adrian's tone. He saw something flicker in those gray eyes, something dark, possessive, and infinitely patient. But in his vulnerable state, Julian interpreted it as kindness. He slumped, the adrenaline of the divorce finally leaving him. "Thank you," he whispered, fighting back tears. "Don't thank me," Adrian murmured, steering him towards the interior of the apartment. "Just let me take care of you. I've been waiting a long time to do that." Life at the penthouse was a sedative. It was a gilded cage where Julian's every need was anticipated before he could even articulate it. Adrian was the CEO of Cross Global, a logistics conglomerate that seemed to run the city's shipping lanes. He left early and returned late, but whenever he was home, his attention was solely on Julian. He cooked elaborate meals, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He listened to Julian ramble about the heartbreak, the betrayal, the crushing sense of inadequacy. Elias was a fool, Adrian said one evening, pouring a glass of vintage Pinot Noir. They were sitting on the plush velvet sofa, the city lights twinkling below them like fallen stars. He held a diamond and treated it like glass. Julian managed a weak laugh, swirling the wine. I don't feel like a diamond. I feel like I was easy to discard. Adrian set his glass down with a sharp clack. He turned his body fully toward Julian, his gaze dropping to Julian's lips, then back up to his eyes. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, charged with static. You are not discardable, Adrian said, his voice dropping an octave. You are the only thing in this world with any value. If Elias were here right now, I would tear his throat out for making you believe otherwise. The violence in the statement was stark, contrasting with Adrian's composed demeanor. Julian blinked, expecting a smile to soften the words, but Adrian's expression remained deadly serious. You're a good friend, Adrian? Julian whispered, feeling a flush creep up his neck. Friend? Adrian tested the word, tasting it like bile. Yes, for now. The cracks in the facade began to show in the second week. It started with small things. Julian mentioned craving a specific type of spicy noodle from a stall they used to visit in college. An hour later, a private chef was in the kitchen preparing that exact dish. Julian complained about a headache. Adrian produced a specific brand of painkillers that Julian had used years ago, but hadn't bought recently. Then came the incident with Elias. Julian had been walking near the tower, trying to regain some semblance of independence, when Elias had cornered him. The ex-husband looked disheveled, desperate for money, and angry that his cash cow had dried up. He had grabbed Julian's arm, shouting obscenities, dragging him toward an alley. Before Julian could scream, a black SUV screeched to the curb. Two men in suits materialized as if from smoke. They didn't speak. They simply neutralized Elias with terrifying efficiency, breaking his wrist with a sickening crunch before shoving him into the back of the vehicle. Julian stood frozen on the sidewalk, shaking. The rear window of the SUV rolled down, and Adrian sat there, his face in shadow. Get in, Julian, Adrian said calmly. Where are they taking him? Julian asked, his voice trembling as he climbed in. Somewhere he can learn manners, Adrian replied. He reached over, taking Julian's trembling hands into his own warm, large ones. He began to massage the circulation back into Julian's fingers, completely ignoring the muffled screams coming from the trunk of the car. Adrian, who are those men? Security, Adrian said smoothly. I told you I run a logistics company. Cargo needs protection. That didn't look like corporate security? Julian countered, a seed of fear finally taking root in his belly. That looked like a hit squad. Adrian stopped massaging. He lifted Julian's hand to his lips, kissing the knuckles where the skin was white from strain. The world is a dangerous place, my sweet Julian. Sometimes, to protect the things that matter, one must become a monster. Do you fear me? Julian looked at the man who had fed him, housed him, and now, apparently, assaulted his ex-husband for him. He should have said yes. He should have opened the door and ran. But the warmth of Adrian's hands was the only stability he had felt in months. No, Julian admitted softly. I don't think I do. Adrian smiled then. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. Good. Because I would never let you go, even if you did. The seed of suspicion, however, had been planted. Adrian went away on a business trip to Macau for 2 days, leaving Julian alone in the penthouse. The solitude, once peaceful, now felt heavy. The silence of the apartment seemed watchful. Julian began to notice things he had ignored before. The sensors on the windows. The way the smart home system seemed to know which room he was in before he turned on a light. The locked door at the end of the East Wing corridor, which Adrian had casually dismissed as a server room for his high-frequency trading algorithms. Curiosity is a fatal flaw, but for Julian it was a necessity. He needed to know who he was sleeping next to. He found the key card in Adrian's study, tucked inside a copy of Dante's Inferno. It was a heavy, black card with no markings. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird as he walked down the East Wing hallway. The penthouse was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning. He reached the steel door. He hesitated. If he opened this, there was no going back. He knew that instinctively. He swiped the card. The light turned green. The lock disengaged with a pneumatic hiss. Julian stepped inside, and his world collapsed. It was a control room. A bank of servers hummed against the far wall, cooling fans whirring aggressively. But the centerpiece was the wall of monitors. 32 screens. Screen 1. Julian in the shower, the steam blurring the lens. Screen 4. Julian reading in the library, unaware. Screen 9. A street view of Julian's old apartment with Elias. Screen 15. Julian sleeping, zoomed in on his face, peaceful and oblivious. And then, the physical evidence. A corkboard covered in photographs. Julian at the grocery store. Julian at the park. Julian crying on a park bench 3 years ago. There were notes, detailed timelines of his movements, financial records of Elias's debts, and a dossier on every person Julian had spoken to in the last decade. It wasn't just surveillance. It was a shrine. It was a documentation of a life lived under a microscope. "Oh God!" Julian gasped, stumbling back. He knocked over a stack of files. He's been watching me. The whole time. He never lost touch. He was just waiting. The realization made him nauseous. The kindness, the coincidence of Adrian answering the phone, it was all orchestrated. Or rather, it was the inevitable conclusion of a stalker's long game. The door clicked shut. Julian spun around. Adrian stood there. He was supposed to be in Macau. He was wearing a black trench coat, damp with rain, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked wild, dangerous, and utterly unrepentant. "I explicitly told you," Adrian purred, stepping into the blue light, "that the East Wing was strictly off-limits, Julian. You." Julian backed away until he hit the desk. "You're sick. You've been watching me? For years." "Watching over you," Adrian corrected, removing his leather gloves slowly, finger by finger. "There is a difference. You have cameras in the bathroom. You have photos of me from when I was married." "Why?" Julian screamed, fear finally overriding the shock. "Why didn't you just call me if you missed me?" Adrian stopped. The mask of the CEO fell away, revealing the raw, jagged edge of the man beneath. He closed the distance in a blur of motion, slamming his hands onto the desk on either side of Julian, trapping him. "Because I am not a good man, Julian," Adrian roared, the sound vibrating in Julian's chest. "I am the head of the Cygnus Syndicate. I deal in blood, information, and death. My enemies would have flayed you alive just to get to me. I had to stay away. I had to let you live your normal, safe, mediocre life with that maggot Elias because being with me puts a target on your back the size of this city." Julian stared at him wide-eyed. You're a criminal. I am a king," Adrian hissed, leaning in until their noses brushed. "And you are my queen, whether you knew it or not. I watched to keep you safe. I watched to make sure Elias didn't hurt you too badly. And when he finally broke you, I knew it was time. I couldn't wait anymore. I couldn't watch you cry one more time without wiping the tears away myself. This is insane," Julian breathed, though his heart was pounding with a confusing mixture of terror and arousal. "You manipulated everything." "I manipulated nothing but the timing," Adrian whispered, his voice dropping to a desperate caress. "I let you come to me, and now that you are here, do you really want to leave? Do you want to go back to the cold? To the loneliness? Or do you want to be worshipped?" He grabbed Julian's chin, forcing him to look at the screens. "Look at them. Look at how beautiful you are. I have memorized every breath you take. No one will ever love you like I do. No one will ever kill for you like I will. Julian looked at the screens. He saw himself, alone and sad for so many years. And then he looked at Adrian, the monster who had stood guard in the shadows. Why the cameras, Adrian? Julian asked, his voice shaking. Why not just guards? Adrian rested his forehead against Julian's. Because I needed to see you. It was the only way I could breathe. You are my oxygen, Julian. Without this, he gestured to the screens, I would have suffocated. A sudden explosion rocked the building. The lights in the server room flickered and died, replaced by emergency red strobes. An alarm blared, a low, mechanical howl. Adrian's demeanor shifted instantly. The obsession vanished, replaced by cold, lethal competence. He pulled a handgun from the small of his back, checking the chamber in one fluid motion. They found us, Adrian said, his voice void of emotion. My rivals. They know you're here. They know you're my weakness. What? Julian grabbed Adrian's coat. I told you, being with me is dangerous. Adrian looked at him, and for the first time, there was fear in the crime lord's eyes. Not for himself, but for Julian. If you want to leave, Julian, run to the elevator now. My security will get you out. You can disappear. I won't track you again. I promise. He offered Julian an out, a chance to escape the madness. Julian looked at the gun. He looked at the red alert lights. He thought of Elias, who had thrown him away like trash. He thought of the empty, cold apartment he had lived in for years. Then he looked at Adrian, the man who had built a fortress of surveillance just to feel close to him. It was twisted. It was dark. It was morally bankrupt. And it was the most intense love Julian had ever known. A heavy thud echoed from the living room. Glass shattering. Gunfire. Julian reached out and wrapped his hand around Adrian's tie, yanking him down. He kissed him hard, desperate, and accepting. I'm not going anywhere, Julian said against Adrian's lips. Give me a gun. Adrian stared at him for a heartbeat, a slow, feral grin spreading across his face. It was the look of a man who had just won the lottery and the war in the same breath. That's my boy, Adrian growled. He didn't give Julian a gun. Instead, he shoved Julian behind the heavy server rack. Stay down. Watch the screens. Tell me where they are. Adrian moved into the corridor, into the darkness, a predator unleashed. Julian turned to the wall of monitors. He saw the intruders moving through the living room on screen 4. 3 men, tactical gear. 3 in the living room, heading for the hallway. Julian shouted. On the screen, he saw Adrian emerge from the shadows. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Adrian moved with a grace that was terrifying to behold, dispatching the intruders with brutal efficiency. Julian watched, his heart racing. He wasn't scared of Adrian anymore. He was captivated. When the silence finally returned to the penthouse, Adrian walked back into the server room. He was splattered with blood that wasn't his. He looked at Julian, waiting for the revulsion, waiting for the rejection. Julian stood up. He walked over to Adrian, took a handkerchief from his pocket, and gently wiped a speck of blood from Adrian's cheek. You missed a spot, Julian whispered. Adrian let out a shuddering breath, dropping the gun to the floor. He wrapped his arms around Julian, lifting him off his feet, burying his face in Julian's neck. I'm sorry, Adrian rasped. I'm so sorry I dragged you into this. You didn't drag me, Julian said, running his fingers through Adrian's dark hair. I walked in, and I'm staying. But Adrian, yes, take the cameras out of the bathroom. That's just creepy. Adrian let out a low, rough laugh, the sound vibrating against Julian's chest. Negotiable. But the rest stay. I need to know you're safe when I'm not here. We'll discuss it, Julian said, tightening his grip. Just don't leave me alone again. Never, Adrian vowed, pressing a kiss to Julian's pulse point. You are mine, Julian. Past, present, and future. No cameras needed to see that. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Adrian take control, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who tried to kill you? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,